Most organizations believe resilience comes from stronger governance, more policies, more committees, more dashboards. Frederick Gillen argues something different. Resilience is not created by documentation. It is revealed by how an organization behaves and whose frameworks come under stress. Welcome back. You're listening to Risk Masters, the download, where I share bite-sized insight from our latest interviews. This extract comes from a conversation with Frederick Gillen, executive partner at Reply. Having advised financial institutions, regulators, and boards across multiple jurisdictions, Frederick has developed a unique perspective on organizational resilience. In this extract, he explains why resilience is fundamentally a design choice rather than a documentation exercise, and why organizations often overestimate the protection provided by governance frameworks. Here is Frederick.
Inside organizations will tend to overestimate the protective value of frameworks. We have policies, we have committees, we have dashboards. All of this creates a feeling of preparedness. But resilience is not the presence of documentation, is it? It is the behavior of the system under stress. So what the vantage point reveals is that resilience is not really a technical problem. It's a design choice. It's about how much redundancy and transparency you are willing to tolerate before stress forces the issue. And I think in a single organization, if you're a leader in one organization, you rarely get to observe this in comparative form. So long-winded answer, but
fundamentally, three core insights that have a really strong impact on strategy and organizational design, don't they? And I think we're going to explore that further as we go. And so when you think about it, where do early signs of fragility get normalized rather than challenged, right? Where do they disappear in a way? It becomes, well, actually, we are within the parameters you mentioned, so everything is fine.
Probably in the space between temporary and acceptable. You start with a control exception, trade-off, and that quietly becomes the new normal. And that's what's striking from a cross-firm point of view. No one believes that they are lowering the standards. They believe they are being pragmatic. And again, back to my first point, each decision in itself is rational. It's just the accumulation of all of that creates the fragility that you don't see under normal circumstances, but you can feel it pretty badly under stress.
Yeah, it's again, and it kind of aligns as well into what I'm observing as well across organizations. And I'd like to explore that a little bit further to see if there are salient points from what you've observed that drives that pattern quite systematically. Let's come back to that. And across jurisdiction and regulatory environments, do failure patterns look different on the surface, yet similar underneath? Do you see any nuances there in the way they actually permeate?
It's an interesting question. I think on the surface, things are very different. I mean, in one jurisdiction, it might be, the trigger might be capital misallocation. In another, it can be a cyber incident. So yes, there are variations on the surface of it. But if you look underneath, the structural patterns are very similar. Even if you think about COVID, we typically are exposed due to the same vulnerabilities and concentration risk, fragmented accountability, and overconfidence built on past stability. We survived a crisis, we did well in a crisis, and we tend as organizations to build a level of overconfidence. Nothing can happen to us. So I think for me, under the surface, the same vulnerabilities are there. Concentration risk, definitely fragmented accountability that works well under normal conditions, but again, doesn't work at all under stress, and overconfidence.
And you might have answered partly at least the next question, but what do leaders consistently believe about their organization's resilience that really doesn't hold true under stress, so it disappears?
I think two things, and probably more, but two things come to mind. First, that documented capability equals operational capability. And you and I have seen that. We've seen institutions that walk into a crisis with a beautifully documented recovery plan or BCP. And then they spend the first 24 hours debating who has the authority to invoke it. There is a fundamental gap between the documentation and the implementation. And the second belief that collapses is that escalation functions as designed. On paper, if you look at most frameworks and documentation about that deal with resilience, things are linear, they are timely, but under stress it doesn't happen like that. Information slows, accountability becomes cautious. Stress doesn't test policies. Stress tests behaviors. And I think these are two things that do not hold under stress. And I think we simply don't have, for most leaders, we're just not exposed to that enough, and therefore we tend to underestimate those two issues.